Let me tell you a story about money. Not just a little bit of money, the kind you save up for a new car or a down payment on a house. We're talking about real money. The kind of wealth that buys silence, influence, and private islands. The kind of money that belonged to Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne was a self-made titan. He built his empire in tech, specifically in data aggregation and AI. The stuff most of us don't really understand, but the stuff that makes the world go round and generates billions of dollars while you sleep. By the time he was 48, he was a fixture in the New York financial skyline, his face gracing the cover of every business magazine that mattered. He was sharp, ruthless, and had the unsettling habit of looking at people not as human beings, but as assets or liabilities. Then there was Clara. Clara Thorne had been married to Marcus for 20 long years. She wasn't the trophy wife he picked up after he got rich. Oh no, Clara was the woman who was there when Marcus was nobody. She was the one who lived in a cramped, smelly apartment in Palo Alto, eating instant noodles while Marcus stayed awake for 72 hours straight, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer ambition, coding the algorithm that would eventually make him a legend. She answered the phones. She managed the bills when they couldn't afford a secretary, and most importantly, she hosted the early investor dinners. You know, those crucial meetings where everything hangs in the balance? Clara made those dinners happen. She was the warmth, the stability, the human face of the cold, driven machine that was Marcus Thorne. She gave up her own burgeoning career in graphic design to ensure his rocket ship had a steady launch pad. For 20 years, she had been the silent partner, the foundation of the empire. Now, picture the scene. It was a Tuesday evening in late September. They were in their penthouse apartment, high above Central Park, the view so stunning it looked fake, like a postcard glued to the window. Marcus was standing by the floor-to-ceiling glass, holding a glass of single malt scotch that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Clara was sitting on a cream-colored Italian sofa, reading a novel. The silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a lead blanket. Marcus cleared his throat. He didn't look at her. "Clara," he said, his voice flat, professional, like he was addressing a board of directors about a minor restructuring. "I'm filing the papers." Clara lowered her book, marking her page carefully with a silk bookmark. She didn't gasp or cry. After 2 decades with Marcus, she knew that when he finally decided to pull the plug, it would be done with the efficiency of a corporate takeover. "Divorce," she stated, not asking a question. "Yes, it's time. We haven't been married in any real sense for over a decade. Let's be honest. It's purely administrative now." Marcus finally turned, his expression bored. "I've instructed my legal team, Sterling and Associates. They're handling the formalities." Clara took a slow breath. "And after 20 years, 2 children, and building a life together, what exactly are those formalities, Marcus?" He smiled then, a tight, cold expression that never reached his eyes. It was a smile he used when he was about to close a deal that left the other guy bankrupt. "That, my dear, is the easy part. You remember the prenuptial agreement, don't you?" Of course, she remembered. It was signed 6 weeks before their wedding, when Marcus's company was still just a promising startup, not a global powerhouse. She had been so in love, so focused on the future, that she barely skimmed the documents. Marcus had assured her it was just standard business protocol. "It's ironclad, Clara. Sterling and Associates specialize in this. It stipulates that in the event of dissolution of marriage, any assets accrued during the marriage, specifically the equity in Thorne Global, remains solely the property of the founding partner, myself. You waived all rights to shared marital assets. I was 27, Marcus, and you told me it was just a formality," Clara said, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "I was helping you build that company." "Helping me? You were managing a home," he corrected instantly, his tone dismissive. A necessary service, I grant you, but financially irrelevant to the valuation of Thorn Global. My team has calculated the final settlement. It's generous, considering the legal parameters. He walked over to a small mahogany table and picked up a single, crisp, white envelope. He placed it on the coffee table, in front of her. Inside, you will find the deed to the summer house in Nantucket. It's fully paid off, no mortgage, and a check. Clara looked at the envelope, her heart sinking, but her dignity holding firm. How much, Marcus? Half of what we built? A quarter? Enough to live comfortably. Marcus chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Comfortable? Clara, you misunderstand. I am a billionaire. I don't do comfortable. I do decisive. Legally, the prenup is absolute. My lawyers confirm that you are entitled to nothing beyond what was explicitly defined as yours before the marriage, which effectively is zero. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though they were alone. However, I am not without sentiment. I wanted to make a point, a symbolic gesture, if you will, to truly close this chapter. He tapped the envelope. The check is for $1. $1. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara felt a strange, cold tingling sensation spread through her body. Not rage, not sorrow yet, but profound disbelief. $1, she repeated slowly, the word tasting like ash. 20 years of my life, raising your children, supporting your career, moving across the country 3 times to your business, hosting hundreds of events, managing your social calendar, sacrificing my own future, and you offer me $1? It's legally sound, Clara. Sterling and Associates are the best. They ensure I retain 100% of my net worth. The dollar is an acknowledgement of the contract. He checked his expensive Swiss watch. The papers are being filed tomorrow morning in the New York State Supreme Court. I suggest you hire a lawyer, though honestly, it will just delay the inevitable. Marcus then turned his back on her and walked toward the door of his private study. I need to take a call with Tokyo, he said, already forgetting she was there. The housekeeper will help you pack your things from a master bedroom. I've moved into the guest suite for now. Clara didn't move for a long time. She stared at the envelope, visualizing the single, pathetic dollar bill lying. Inside, it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect. It was about 20 years of her life being categorized as utterly worthless by the man she had loved and helped elevate to the stratosphere. When she finally stood up, she didn't pick up the envelope. She walked straight to her phone and called the only person she could think of, Evelyn Reed. Evelyn Reed was not a flashy lawyer. She wasn't one of the shark-infested names Marcus usually dealt with. Evelyn specialized in complex family law, and she had a reputation for being meticulous, relentless, and possessing an almost frighteningly calm demeanor. She operated out of a modest, well-organized office in downtown Manhattan, far from the polished glass towers of Marcus's firm. Clara sat across from Evelyn 2 days later, retelling the story. Evelyn listened, her face grave, occasionally nodding as she reviewed the copy of the prenuptial agreement Clara had managed to dig out of the safety deposit box. Marcus hired Sterling and Associates, Clara finished, her voice flat. They're demanding I vacate the premises within 30 days and accept the terms, the Nantucket house and the symbolic dollar. Evelyn pushed her reading glasses up her nose and tapped the document with a pen. Clara, I need to be brutally honest with you. This is an expertly crafted document. The language is extremely clear. It covers all potential loopholes regarding future wealth, equity, intellectual property, and even the appreciation of assets. So he's right? Clara asked, clutching her hands in her lap. 20 years, and I walk away with nothing but a summer house I barely use. Legally, based solely on this document, yes, Evelyn confirmed sadly, Marcus Thorne is known for being utterly paranoid about protecting his assets. He essentially made sure that if the marriage failed, the business didn't even feel a tremor. Evelyn leaned back, folding her hands. However, we have one angle, and it's a slim one. We can try to argue the document is unconscionable, meaning so grossly unfair that no reasonable person would have signed it. But in New York, proving unconscionability is very difficult, especially since you were represented by counsel, even if it was minimal at the time of signing. I don't care how hard it is, Evelyn. I want to fight this, Clara insisted, leaning forward. Not for the billions, though God knows I deserve some of that. I want to fight this because Marcus is trying to erase my existence. He is trying to say that my contribution, my life, was worth $1. I refuse to let him do that. Evelyn smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Good. That's the fire we need. We will file a counterpetition immediately. We will demand a full accounting of all assets, even if the prenup excludes division. We will argue for spousal support based on the extreme disparity of income and the length of the marriage. We will make them fight for every single cent, Clara. The next few months were a blur of legal maneuvers. Marcus's lawyers, Sterling and Associates, were exactly what Evelyn had feared: aggressive, arrogant, and seemingly limitless in their resources. They bombarded Clara and Evelyn with paperwork. Motions to dismiss, motions to compel, discovery requests that filled dozens of filing cabinets. They treated Clara's claim like a minor infestation. They needed to fumigate. Marcus himself refused to attend any mediation sessions. He delegated everything, viewing the process as an irritating distraction from his next IPO. He thinks I'll break, Clara told Evelyn one evening after a particularly nasty deposition where Marcus's lawyer had questioned her spending habits in excruciating detail. He expects you to fold, yes, Evelyn agreed. Most wives, facing a legal machine like this, run out of money or nerve. But we haven't run out of either, have we? No, Clara said firmly. She had started drawing again, finding solace in the colors and shapes she had abandoned years ago. She was reconnecting with the person Marcus had tried to smother under layers of luxury and expectation. The key moment arrived 6 months into the divorce proceedings. The case was finally heading to trial, though it was expected to be short, mainly focusing on the interpretation of the prenuptial agreement. The judge assigned to the case was Judge Eleanor Vance. Judge Vance was notorious in the New York court system. She was known as the Iron Lady of Family Court. She had zero tolerance for legal theatrics, zero interest in who was richer, and a laser focus on fairness and the letter of the law. She was tough, smart, and rarely surprised. Marcus, confident that the law was on his side, finally decided to make an appearance for the first day of the trial. He arrived looking immaculate, flanked by his entire team of sharp, dark-suited lawyers, led by Mr. Julian Vance. No relation to the judge, thankfully. They walked into the courtroom like they were entering a victorious press conference. Clara sat on the opposite side of the room, next to Evelyn, feeling small but resolved. She wore a simple, tailored navy suit, professional, but not overtly expensive. She wanted to look like a woman fighting for justice, not for jewels. The courtroom was quiet, filled with a serious, stale air of institutional power. When Judge Vance entered, everyone stood. She was a woman in her late 60s, her hair pulled back tightly, her expression unreadable. The opening arguments were exactly as expected. Mr. Vance, Marcus's chief counsel, stood up and delivered a masterful, icy presentation. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and commanding, "this is not a complicated case. This is a simple matter of contract law. 20 years ago, the petitioner, Mr. Thorne, and the respondent, Ms. Thorne, entered into a binding prenuptial agreement. This document clearly and unambiguously stipulates the division of assets. It is signed, witnessed, and legally sound. He then proceeded to detail the specific clauses Clara had signed away, emphasizing the sheer scope of Marcus's current wealth, he argued, that was generated solely by Marcus's intellectual property and business acumen, completely separate from any domestic contributions. The petitioner has already offered Ms. Thorne the fully paid-off residence in Nantucket, a generous gesture far exceeding the legal requirements of the contract. The petitioner is merely seeking to enforce the agreed-upon terms, allowing him to retain the equity and control of the multi-billion-dollar entity he created. We ask the court to validate the prenup and grant the divorce under the terms already offered. The Nantucket property and the symbolic $1, Mr. Vance concluded, sitting down with a satisfied smirk. The message was clear. Clara was trying to steal money she hadn't earned, and the law, thankfully, prevented that. Evelyn Reed then stood up. She didn't try to outshout the billionaire's lawyer. She spoke quietly, but every word carried weight. Your Honor, we acknowledge the existence of the prenuptial agreement. However, we contend that this agreement, signed under circumstances of extreme emotional duress and massive informational asymmetry, is unconscionable. It serves to completely erase 20 years of marital partnership. Evelyn walked slowly toward the bench. We are not here today simply fighting over money. We are fighting over the valuation of invisible labor. When Marcus Thorne was sleeping on the floor, it was Clara who kept the lights on. When he needed a stable environment to build his empire, it was Clara who provided it. She sacrificed her own career, her own financial independence, to ensure his success. To dismiss that contribution as financially irrelevant is not only insulting, Your Honor, it is fundamentally unjust. She paused, looking directly at Judge Vance. The law is often slow to recognize the true value of the non-financial partner, but justice is not blind equity. We are demanding a full review of the circumstances surrounding the growth of Thorne Global, specifically to determine if Ms. Thorne's actions constitute a direct, measurable contribution to the company's success, despite the language of the prenup. The lawyers from Marcus scoffed audibly. Direct contribution? Clara hadn't written a single line of code or sat on a single board meeting. Judge Vance listened to both arguments, her face expressionless. She then addressed Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance, I have reviewed the prenuptial agreement several times. It is indeed a formidable document. On its face, it seems Miss Thorne's claim is severely limited. Marcus leaned forward, a small, triumphant smile playing on his lips. He was winning. However, Judge Vance continued, her voice sharp. I find Ms. Reed's point regarding equity compelling. 20 years is a long time, and while the law protects contracts, it also protects against gross unfairness. I will not dismiss Ms. Thorne's case. We will proceed to hear evidence on the valuation of non-monetary contributions. Marcus Thorne looked furious. He hadn't expected the judge to allow the case to proceed past the initial contract review. He had expected a quick rubber stamp. The trial began in earnest. Marcus's lawyers presented expert witnesses who testified to the technical brilliance of Thorne Global, arguing that the company's value was purely intellectual, created solely by Marcus and his engineers. They presented charts showing Clara's minimal income history since the marriage, proving she had not invested capital. Evelyn, however, focused on the foundation. She brought in witnesses, former colleagues, nannies, even the family's longtime housekeeper, who testified about the environment Clara had created. They spoke of the meticulously managed home, the constant travel coordination, the way Clara handled every single domestic crisis, ensuring Marcus had the absolute, undisturbed mental space to work. Mr. Thorne was able to create billions because he never once had to worry about running his household, Evelyn argued. Clara Thorne created the ecosystem of stability necessary for that level of focus. Marcus's team countered that this was simply the definition of being a spouse, and not grounds for dissolving a valid contract. Clara took the stand and spoke quietly about the early days, the sacrifices, the promise of partnership. She did not cry, but her sincerity was palpable. She ended her testimony by saying, "He told me he needed me to manage the world so he could focus on the universe. Now he says the world I manage is worth nothing." The courtroom drama dragged on for several tense weeks. Marcus grew increasingly agitated, realizing this wasn't the swift, clean execution he had planned. The legal fees were mounting, though they were a drop in his ocean of wealth. What bothered him was the principle, the challenge to his absolute control. Finally, the day arrived for closing arguments. The evidence was all in. Legally, the prenup still looked like a fortress. Evelyn had fought valiantly, but the simple, cold fact remained. Clara had signed away her rights to community property. As Evelyn delivered her final plea for equity and fairness, Marcus sat back, radiating confidence. He knew that emotion rarely defeated a properly drafted contract. Judge Vance listened intently. When both sides finished, she announced that she would take a week to review the exhaustive evidence and deliver her final verdict. A week later, the courtroom was packed. Marcus was there, looking slightly less arrogant, but still convinced of victory. Clara was nervous, her hands clammy, but prepared for the worst. Judge Vance entered, and the room fell silent. She sat down, adjusted her microphone, and began to speak, her voice slow and deliberate. "The court has reviewed all evidence presented in the matter of Thorne versus Thorne. We have examined the prenuptial agreement, and I must state, Mr. Vance, that your firm drafted one of the most comprehensive asset protection documents I have ever encountered." Marcus gave his lawyer a small, satisfied nod. However, the judge continued, her eyes sweeping over the room. "The law is not merely a collection of contracts. It is a search for justice. And in this case, the pursuit of justice has led the court into a very deep hole, a hole that the petitioner, Mr. Thorne, inadvertently dug himself." She leaned forward slightly. "The core argument presented by the defense is that Ms. Thorne's contribution was purely domestic and therefore non-compensable under the terms of the prenup. The petitioner's team has repeatedly argued that the value of Thorne Global is solely derived from the petitioner's genius and intellectual property." Judge Vance paused, picking up a thin file from the pile in front of her. This is where the court found a fatal and, frankly, astonishing flaw in the petitioner's claim. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. In reviewing the extensive discovery documents, specifically the original incorporation papers filed in Delaware in 2003, the court found a small but legally significant detail that appears to have been overlooked by the petitioner's high-powered legal team, a detail that reveals the absolute non-negotiable secret to the success of Thorne Global. The room was utterly silent. Clara looked at Evelyn, who looked equally bewildered. They hadn't found anything in the incorporation documents. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Vance said, her voice now sharp, when you filed those initial papers, you were required to list the original shareholders and the initial capital investment necessary to secure the first round of funding. While you were indeed listed as the primary shareholder, holding 99.9% of the equity, there was one critical, foundational element that the prenup failed to account for, precisely because it predates the massive wealth generation, but not the legal entity itself. Judge Vance opened the file. "The secret, Mr. Thorne, is this. Thorne Global was founded on the initial capital investment of $10,000. And according to these documents, that $10,000, which served as the seed money for the entire multi-billion-dollar entity, was not provided by you, Mr. Thorne." She looked directly at Marcus, whose face had gone pale. "That $10,000, Judge Vance announced clearly, was a loan from Miss Clara Thorne's mother, secured against a small inheritance, and was listed in the company's original filing as a debt obligation to Miss Clara Thorne, personally, before she signed that prenuptial agreement. The prenup, Judge Vance stated, clearly protects assets acquired before the marriage. The $10,000 of seed money, the foundation of the entire company, was Clara's. And the secret that the court now reveals, Mr. Thorne, is that you never paid it back. Now, hold on a minute. You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. Marcus Thorne, the man who built an empire on flawless contracts and ruthless efficiency, looked like someone just pulled the rug out from under him, revealing a pit filled with quicksand. Pale? He was practically translucent. His lead counsel, Mr. Vance, sprang to his feet, a frantic energy finally replacing his usual icy calm. Your Honor, that money was a loan. It was a debt obligation, easily repaid at any time. It was not an equity investment. Judge Vance didn't even look up at him. She just tapped the file again. Mr. Vance, if it was a debt obligation, why was it never repaid? And why, in the initial filing, was it listed as initial capitalization, $10,000 source? See Thorne Personal Assets? She continued, her voice resonating through the silence. The prenuptial agreement, which you fought so hard to uphold, clearly states that any assets owned by Ms. Clara Thorne prior to marriage are protected from division, and crucially, the appreciation of those assets is also protected. That $10,000 was the oxygen in the incubator. It was the absolute non-negotiable legal foundation that allowed Thorne Global to be born. Without it, the company simply did not exist. Marcus tried to interrupt, his voice a strained, high-pitched croak. It's negligible. $10,000 compared to $12 billion. It's a rounding error. Judge Vance glared at him, and the courtroom instantly grew colder. Mr. Thorne, do not interrupt the court. That $10,000 was 100% of the initial capitalization. That means legally, Ms. Thorne held 100% of the foundational equity required to create the legal entity that became Thorne Global. She slammed the file shut. You spent 20 years using that foundation, building a skyscraper on her land, and then tried to kick her out with $1, claiming the foundation was worthless. The law, Mr. Thorne, finds that argument not only insulting but financially absurd. Evelyn Reed, Clara's lawyer, finally allowed a tiny, almost invisible smile to cross her lips. She hadn't found that detail because Marcus's legal team had buried the original incorporation papers deep in the discovery. They were so focused on the prenup and the current valuation that they forgot to check the absolute beginning. Judge Vance leaned forward for a final pronouncement. The court finds that the prenuptial agreement, while valid in its attempt to protect the petitioner's intellectual property, is rendered unconscionable by the petitioner's failure to acknowledge and compensate the foundational capital investment made by the respondent, Ms. Clara Thorne. That initial investment, protected by the very terms of the prenup, appreciated alongside the company. She then delivered a verdict that would echo through the financial world for years. Therefore, the court rules as follows. The prenuptial agreement is upheld regarding the division of intellectual property developed during the marriage. However, due to the appreciation of Ms. Thorne's premarital capital investment and the 20 years of marital support that allowed the company to thrive, the court is obligated to provide equitable relief. She looked straight at Marcus, who was now gripping the defense table so tightly his knuckles were white. The court hereby awards Ms. Clara Thorne a settlement reflecting the proportionate growth of her foundational capital. Ms. Thorne will receive a 10% stake in Thorne Global, free and clear of all encumbrances. This stake is non-voting, but fully liquid and transferable, ensuring Ms. Thorne's financial independence immediately. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. 10% of Thorne Global. Even conservatively, that was over $1 billion. Marcus Thorne, the man who offered $1, was now forced to surrender $1 billion. Furthermore, Judge Vance continued, the court finds that the Nantucket residence, while a generous offer is not sufficient. The court mandates that Mr. Thorne maintain the primary New York residence for Ms. Thorne for a period of 5 years, ensuring stability for the children. Mr. Thorne will also be responsible for all legal fees incurred by Ms. Thorne. She paused, taking a sip of water. The tension was unbearable. Finally, regarding the symbolic gesture made by the petitioner, the offer of $1. The court finds that Ms. Thorne's 20 years of non-monetary contribution to the marriage must be acknowledged. While the court has awarded a significant financial settlement based on capital appreciation, the principle of respect remains paramount. Judge Vance looked at Clara, and for the first time, her expression softened slightly. Ms. Thorne, your contribution was not worthless. It was the bedrock. Mr. Thorne attempted to categorize your life's work as a liability worth $1. The court rejects that valuation entirely. This marriage is dissolved, effective immediately, and Mr. Thorne is ordered to transfer the assets as stipulated. She hammered the gavel down, a sound that felt like a gunshot in the silence. Court adjourned. Chaos erupted immediately. Marcus's legal team swarmed him, whispering frantically. Mr. Vance looked utterly defeated, realizing the small print they had ignored had cost their client a fortune. Clara, however, didn't move. She just sat there, breathing slowly, taking in the reality of what had just happened. It wasn't the billions that mattered most. It was a formal public acknowledgement from the highest court that her life, her work, her sacrifice was not worth $1. Evelyn Reed gently placed a hand on Clara's arm. We won, Clara. We didn't just win the money, we won the moral argument. The $10,000, Clara whispered, shaking her head slightly. I completely forgot about that debt. Mom had to sell some old bonds to lend us that money. Marcus promised to pay it back as soon as we got the first venture capital check. He just never did. He didn't pay it back because he forgot about it, Evelyn said, gathering her papers. He was focused on the next billion, not the first 10,000. That oversight was his arrogance, Clara, and that arrogance cost him dearly. Marcus, meanwhile, was being escorted out of the courtroom by his team. He stopped briefly near Clara's table, his eyes blazing with cold, intense hatred. You knew, he hissed, low enough so only they could hear. You planned this. Clara finally looked up at him, her gaze steady and calm. She had shed the last remnants of the woman who needed his approval. Marcus, she said, her voice clear, I truly forgot about the $10,000. I was so busy supporting your memory, your vision, and your life that I didn't keep track of my own, but the law remembered. She tapped the table where he had placed the envelope with the $1 check 6 months ago. You wanted a symbolic gesture? You got one. You wanted to erase my existence? The judge just validated it with $1 billion. Marcus didn't have a response. He could only stare at the wreckage of his perfect, controlled life before his lawyers dragged him away. Life changed rapidly for Clara. She moved out of the penthouse, but not far. She moved into a beautiful, sun-filled brownstone near the park, finally a place that felt like hers. The initial settlement meant she was instantly one of the wealthiest women in New York. She hired a team of advisors, not to manage her money, but to figure out how to put to good use. The first thing she did was call Evelyn Reed. She didn't offer her a massive bonus. She offered her a partnership. Evelyn, the meticulous moral lawyer who fought for principle, became the head of Clara's new philanthropic foundation. And what about Marcus? Well, losing 10% of Thorne Global didn't bankrupt him, but it sent a tremor through the market. Investors hated volatility and uncertainty. The revelation that the titan of tech had been defeated by a legal technicality involving $10,000 made him look sloppy, even vulnerable. His carefully constructed image of absolute control was fractured. He eventually had to step down as CEO, taking on the role of Chief Visionary Officer, a polite way of saying he was sidelined by the board. Clara, meanwhile, returned to her passion. She established a high-end graphic design studio in Soho, specializing in branding for female-owned startups. She didn't need the money, but she needed the purpose. She started small, taking on projects she genuinely cared about, using her new capital to hire the best talent and build something entirely her own. One sunny afternoon, about a year after the divorce was finalized, Clara was in her studio reviewing designs. Evelyn walked in, carrying a small, heavy box. "A delivery for you, Clara," Evelyn said, a slight smile playing on her lips. "From Sterling and Associates." Clara raised an eyebrow. What could Marcus possibly be sending me now? Another motion to reduce alimony. Evelyn set the box down. It was a beautiful custom-made wooden box, sealed with an expensive wax stamp. Inside, nestled on a velvet cushion, was a single, crisp $100 bill. Clara picked it up. It looked pristine, almost ceremonial. She turned it over and saw a small, handwritten note stuck to the back. The note, written in Marcus's tight, precise script, simply read, asterisk initial loan repayment. With interest, asterisk Clara stared at the note. He hadn't sent the $10,000. He had sent $100. He was still trying to play games, still trying to minimize the transaction. But the attempt was pathetic. He had finally, formally, acknowledged a debt he'd ignored for 2 decades. Clara laughed, a genuine, strong sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged studio. "You know what, Evelyn?" Clara said, taking the $100 bill and placing it next to her computer monitor. "I think I'll frame this. It's the most expensive $100 he ever spent." She looked out the window at the bustling streets of Manhattan, the city that was now truly hers. She had lost 20 years of conventional marriage, but she had gained something far more valuable: her self-respect, her independence, and the definitive proof that the foundation she laid was not only worthy of acknowledgement, but was, in fact, the entire reason the tower stood tall. The woman who was offered $1 walked away with $1 billion, and all it took was a sharp judge, a good lawyer, and a forgotten $10,000 loan from her mother that Marcus Thorne was too arrogant to ever pay back. That, my friends, is the real cost of forgetting where you came from.